my philosophy is to practice interest-led learning, and as much as possible allow students to direct the process. I try to, whenever possible, I try to disappear in the lesson and just listen for the questions.
And let's just stop there.
Yeah.
Right. Because I think anybody that either ends up seeing this or hearing this or that knows you, that is so different than the majority of comments I see and know from being so close to the piano teaching community, which is so much control. Get through this book, maybe do this competition, you know, this kind of advancement into levels and stuff, which is, you know, it can push a lot of people. It pushed me away from learning piano when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's just that in itself is the core of what you do, interest-led learning, and you try to disappear into the lesson. I've heard you say that a couple times.
Well, I mean, there's the balance between creating and recreating, right? So I think sometimes piano teachers can end up feeling almost a bit like museum custodians, because we work in a field where a lot of beautiful things have already been excavated. We're told that this is how it needs to be shown and this is how it needs to be maintained. And it makes us very happy to see our students follow in that same path, because it's what you know as being good and right. But it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the child's happiness. And what happens to do with a child or a student of any age is to be in the sandbox and create, or to even be outside of the sandbox on the actual beach and just being creative, or whether that's trying to come up with your own interpretation of a song that already exists, or creating a song of your own, something of that nature. But this idea that we have the ability to give them the tools to be creative with, and, you know, at first it's like, it's going to be a mess because they don't know how to use all the tools. You know, but it's okay, because it doesn't matter how much damage is done, because we've already got the stuff in the museum and we can go visit that anytime we want. So I try to give my students a lot of opportunities to be creative. And the important part there is to set them up with constraints, successful constraints. So we're going to create, but within these borders. So that's the idea of kind of the sandbox. You're kind of putting them in this place where it's like, okay, here's your excavation zone, go to it. And again, don't worry about what damage is done, because we've already got the stuff in the museum. Like, just experiment, explore with these tools. And once you master these, I'm going to give you a few more. And you're going to keep knocking out the walls, and you're going to keep building a bigger sandbox until eventually they become completely independent.
You know what? Let me add on to what you just said too, because I feel like I agree 1,000%. We're just on the same page here. And also expression. Like, that's the other thing is, like, you know, this is something, you know, my grandfather was a concert classical pianist. And I remember when I started playing, you know, a guitar, and how he would just really turn his nose up at, like, Jimi Hendrix, the things I just thought were amazing. And he had busts of Brahms and Beethoven on his piano. And I thought that was great, but I didn't want to listen to them. Right. Mm-hmm. Like, I was like, I love Nirvana. Like, this is great expression and create, like, I want to do this. And although he was just being, like, disgusted that I was into that. And of course I wanted to play classical music too, but the stuff that moved me was expression and creativity. Right. And that's, right. You know, I feel like there's so much of a, if we're going to push in one direction, is it going to be to become a technician and be able to accurately interpret music from the 1780s, right? Right. Or, which is awesome, and I think really important, or is it to just be an authentic, creative, expressive human being that can put their emotions out there without fear of judgment? And, like, if we can do that as a teacher, we have won. Like, that is why our students are growing up to be cool people. And I feel like that's, you know, I think that's the big reason so many people meet you and want to study with you, right? Because we, you know, as artists, or as, like, you know, a classical musician myself, I don't want to have the same expectation of my daughter, you know, because I found it myself. I want her to be happy, right? And so anyway, I think that's a really, really great way to frame it, man.
Yeah, it's you know, and so that's what I'm always striving for, is that balance. But the beautiful thing about creating is that, you know, the goal is to create so that you can experience the recreating from what you create. It's like, I create it, but then I can then do it again. And So, I guess the primary like approach that I take is I call it learning by listening, learning through listening, and I teach reading through writing. So I try to get my students at a very early age writing too, because I think that that is such a such a fundamental thing that isn't included a lot in lessons, because people think it takes too much time, and it does. It takes a lot of time, but they learn a lot from it. And so it's giving them assignments to be able to, just encourage them. That's why when I went and made the pocket guide, like, it's primarily a manuscript book and it's got access to these charts in the back, but I wanted something that they could carry around and kind of like record their experiences. When we listen to a song, let's write down the chord progression. It doesn't necessarily have to be individual notes. Sometimes it's just chord progressions and things like that, but just getting them to have the experience of writing. I feel, I noticed myself even like in lessons, just to save time, it's like, oh, I'll write this in for you. Well, it's great now that we're online, because now I can't write it in for them. It's like, I'm like, okay, pick up the pencil. I want you to make a mark here. I might make it on the screen, and sure, I could send them the digital file, but they're working on a song for several weeks. Do I want to send them the file every week when we add more notes? No, like, okay, I'm going to make a mark here, like, write in the fingering on your sheet of paper. And it just gets them, it's more active learning, rather than just sitting there waiting to be instructed. And I've just learned a lot of patience to, just to be quiet, like give them space to figure it out. I had a kid.
So easy to just shout out an answer, isn't it? And be like, oh, just do this. It's a major third. And
yeah, I had a girl yesterday that was just, she kept playing a D major chord when she's supposed to be playing a D minor chord. And it for some reason, it just wasn't registering with her that wasn't the tonality that you wanted in that chord. And so, I had to mention it a few times, but it kept coming back up. And eventually she caught on to it. But if what am I going to do? Sit there and shout it every single time? It's, minor, and she's like, it's just, I don't know. There's that idea of disappearing in the lesson and just giving them some space to figure it out. The other thing I'll say is, like, if this idea of pacing, like, I don't consider it at all. Like, that's kind of the beautiful thing about, like, I'm not in a method book, really. Like, I give my students books so they have material to like sight read and things like that, but that is a very small part of what I do. And so this idea of like pacing just goes out the window. Like, there's this idea that like they have to get to a certain place, or that I have to fit a certain amount of content into a 30-minute lesson and rush. It's just, none of that matters. My whole thought process is if I'm working with a student, my whole goal is to like I'm hoping that I'm going to retain them until they graduate high school. And in that amount of time, they're going to get everything they need to become independent, because it's not about the material. It's like teaching them how to learn, how to work, like to become independent. And so this idea of just letting all that go. I mean, it, like I've said before, it doesn't matter how amazing a 13-year-old piano player is, or an 11-year-old piano player is, if they want to quit when they're 13. It's just, let them enjoy that process. Sometimes I need to go sideways for like 4 months with a student because they're having a hard time. And I'm not, I'm just going to give them more material to reinforce things that they already have. Like, they're in a tough spot. Like, I'm not just going to keep feeding them things that are really intense, if, and on to the next thing. It's like just giving students really manageable, achievable goals. And I think building a large library of things that you can pull from, whether you're creating it from scratch, like I do a lot of times. I'll walk into the lesson, it's like, what are we doing today? Like, I ask the student, or what do you want to show me? Because I really don't care if they've done the assignment that I've given to them or created the experience. All I care is that they spent time at the instrument. They said, I didn't really practice that, but I learned 2 songs by ear. Great, show me. It's like, and maybe that just stems from the fact that I started piano late. I didn't start until, I was in college. So and I didn't have that, like that was my experience. Was I was always, I've never been frustrated at my instrument. you know, I've never been frustrated practicing. Like I would always I tell this, just take a break, you know, like come back to it later, you know, like just like put it down for like it's just, I don't want any of that. So I will look for ways to simplify things and, or to help them manage the way that they practice so that it's not so frustrating. Like I don't want anybody to have that experience, you know?
In this short conversation, there's so much cool stuff to unpack. You know, you're teaching philosophy in a couple lines, which is to disappear and let the child be, or the student's interest drive the lesson, listening a lot, really managing your expectations and just trying to, you said, just have the goal of have the student be at the instrument. You know, it's super cool stuff. And I can't wait to share it because I think it's awesome.
Awesome.